Welcome back to the second episode of PC Ultra Clean, where in the first episode, we took a PC that was just so filthy, and of course, in the process, we fixed it up and made it work like it was brand new as well. But right here on the desk, we've got the next specimen that has come through, and this is where the person that brought it in, they just said, look Brian, this PC, it has some issues where it boots, it won't boot up properly, and I just want to get rid of it, I want some cash. So I ended up trading 300 Aussie dollars for this PC. It features a GTX 970, an i7 on an X79 motherboard, as well as 16 gigabytes of RAM and a 750 watt power supply, as well as an SSD and hard drive. Though, let's dig right into it, see what the problem is first, and then we'll get on to the massive clean.
Do you feel like this when you see this? Well, if so, you can get rid of that Windows activation message with today's video sponsor SCD Keys for as little as $12 USD. After you use that coupon BFTYC, you can get activated today. Links in the description below.
So after trying to boot it up a couple of times, we got as far as a preparing automatic repair screen in Windows, and then it just froze completely, and now we're trying to boot it up again, and it just doesn't boot at all. But regardless, we are now going to take it all apart and just give it a nice clean. Now for this cleaning process, we are going to be using an ultrasonic cleaner with, you guessed it, tap water and detergent. However, the catch is here is that we have to get the water off the parts as soon as we are done cleaning it, because we don't want to add to any of the already oxidization that is going on with the graphics card and the CPU cooler, and we want to avoid that because we don't want any more metal filings dropping on the graphics card from the CPU cooler. So here's all the parts now. They're all laid out on the table, ready for our cleaning session. Now, one of the criticisms I got, especially in the last video, is that I make this stuff look so easy. And so this part here, like chucking the stuff in the Ultra Cleaner, that is super easy. That's the straightforward process. I'm actually gonna detail the hardest part, and that's after we end up cleaning all the stuff. And that's getting all the water out of every little component here, as well as I guess just the whole final process of getting all these parts to work perfectly. Because I know you've heard it, I know it's counterintuitive when you hear, you know, don't put your PC parts near water, especially just water out of the tap. And yeah, I like to do things differently. I just like when I trial and error things that work and save me time, especially money, then that is going to be the method that I'm going to use going forward. So yes, there are some risks, especially if you want to like do things like leave batteries in your motherboard, but since we're taking that battery out and we're just going to be putting this thing in the ultrasonic cleaner, that's going to be doing all the work, cleaning all this stuff up to brand new. But another thing is that the hardest part of the last video that we did, I would have been this right here, the power supply. Now we put this in the ultrasonic cleaner, and it took me a long time to get the water out of this because I had to make sure, you know, especially with a power supply, you want to make sure there's not one drop of water in there. So I dumped the whole thing in there, and the cables were in there as well, and that was the hardest part. So this time around, I'm only going to dunk the top head unit into the ultrasonic cleaner and then let it do the cleaning, because yeah, it's just something you probably want to be careful of, because you just don't want any water at all in the power supply once you're going to turn it on. Now, of course, you want to discharge the unit as well before it goes into the ultrasonic cleaner. So what we're going to do right now is hook it up to a power supply meter, test it out, make sure it's okay before we even put it in there, and then we're also going to use that power supply tester to drain the power supply.
When we look back into the sun, this is the couldn't see from your wildest heights, anticipating the fear that you thought you'd abandon, questioning ourselves. But the journey we take wasn't meant to be easy. Catch your breath and pour your life. Nowhere left to fall. Find your new way, just in time. Nowhere left to fall. This is not the end. It's just a part of the puzzle. The piece found its way to. This is not the end. It's just a split in the path where your feet take a new trail. Catch your breath and pour your life away. Nowhere left to fall. Find your new way, just in time. Nowhere left to fall. Nowhere left to
And now, after hours of cleaning and then drying out the water and then spraying on some multi-purpose spray, we are now at that phase where we're ready to build this PC. But you may have noticed in some of the previous shots there, we did do the spray painting on the Noctua cooler and fan, as well as a little bit on the side of the GPU cooler and then on the cables that are going to be visible, because I want to go for that stealth look and I want to do it as much as possible with what we've got. Now, we've only spent so far about $5 on a can of spray paint, but we have spent up until this point quite a few hours just cleaning. When it came to drying out all the water, I spent over a good 20 minutes just making sure there wasn't a single drop of water, paying particular attention to the motherboard and the power supply, which has a lot of very small and confined areas which are very tough to get to. So you do want to make sure that you're going thoroughly over these parts, because as I stressed before in the previous episode, you do not want a single drop of water still left on the build when you go to turn it on. So anyway, with that aside, let's get this thing put together and then check out if it finally does boot up. But I'm pretty confident it will boot up because we don't have any more metal shavings, and a lot of dirt and even some rust was coming off some of these parts. So I'm pretty confident that that was the problem. It was just erratic behavior, and that can be caused by, of course, things like metal shavings and just a bit of rust. So let's check it out. So after spending a heap of time building it up and getting those shots of the build completed and what it should have been, it's some real unfortunate news, and that is the motherboard just isn't working. It didn't get past that BIOS screen, and then upon pulling it out and just really checking over it thoroughly, I've tried everything on this board. It just won't work. And unfortunately, it's just really bad news because this is one of the most expensive components on this build, the X79 motherboard. So, you know, the i7-3820, that's relatively cheap compared to what it's going to cost to source an X79 motherboard, especially a Rampage Gene. But, I mean, what do I think happened with this board? Well, there is signs of rust, especially in some of these screws right here. So, perhaps some critical component on the motherboard has just suffered a bit too much rust, and we've got now a faulty board that just really doesn't work properly. And it was a bit odd as well when the build first came in that the RAM was in the C1 and D1 slots. They should have been in A1 and B1. So that's sort of an indicator that there was problems with the motherboard before it even came in. But what we're going to do now, unfortunately, is we're going to change it over just for something budget, because I do flip these PCs, and if I'm putting in too expensive components, especially with a GTX 970, then I'm not going to be making any money at all. In fact, this sort of has ate into the profit margins big time on this PC, to the point where I just think it's going to be hard getting our money back. But let's see what we can whip up anyhow. And now we have finally finished this PC after such a lot of hassle and messing around. And if you guys are into used PCs and you're building them yourself, and especially if you're going to flip them from time to time, you are going to come into problems sooner or later. And if you're not coming into problems, then you're probably one of the luckiest people in the world. But in this episode right here, I just wanted to take you guys through one of those scenarios that kind of turns out to be one of the worst case scenarios, in that the motherboard's faulty. Because if a motherboard's faulty, you just have to replace it. There's no getting around that. I mean, usually you have to replace other things too, but replacing a CPU and a memory stick and things like that, that's actually a lot easier than taking out the whole motherboard. And especially when you get a signal out of the motherboard, both before and after you wash it. And I think it's this time around, I should have thoroughly checked the build when it came in. When the person came in to trade it in, I just saw it booted up, and I was like, yeah, this should be okay, I'll be able to fix it. But it ended up being one of those really rare problems where the motherboard's faulty, something on the motherboard's faulty, but this is what happens. And so I've got to take that hit, because when I give the person the said 300 Aussie dollars for the build, I do so on the pretense that they're never going to hear from me again, and I got to deal with that problem. But at least we got around that by using a Z170. This was a gigabyte board. I picked this board because it was relatively cheap. I got this on a really good deal with an i5-6500, and we used one of these latest i5 Black Stealth coolers that they include in the newer CPUs, where I put a water cooler on that on another build, and then taken that Intel cooler off that build, and it's worked perfectly in this build to keep that stealth look up. Now, I did want to use these two black sticks of memory with no RGB, but they didn't work. They weren't compatible with this motherboard. So there was another problem that came up in between now and finishing off this PC. So we put in two RGB sticks of memory, and they were compatible with the board, and everything works fine. And keep in mind, this was one of those first generation DDR4 motherboards, so some of these boards do have compatibility issues with certain types of memory. But all that aside, we have a build that is working. It's quiet, it runs Firestrike perfectly fine, the temperatures are really good as well. I'll put the score up on the screen for you guys, but it's funny that we've got a 6th gen i5, we've got 16 gigabytes of DDR4 memory, 3200 megahertz of memory, XMP profiles tuned in, and we've got a GTX 970, but
The RX 570 build with the first gen i7, the previous episode where we fixed up that whole PC, that ended up scoring a very similar, if not, I think it scored a higher score in Firestrike than this build did. So you don't have to get the NVIDIA card and the latest and greatest CPU to still get really good price performance out of your rig. In terms of this one here though, moving this on and trying to sell it, trying to flip it, I am going to, unfortunately, because I had to put the motherboard and change the RAM and put a different CPU in and stuff like that, I am not going to make anywhere near a healthy profit margin on this one. As opposed to the previous build, I actually sold that one today, made a nice healthy profit on that one, and they were really happy with that PC. Anyhow, that's about it from me. It's late at night. I'm going to get on out of here. Do let us know, though, in the comments section below what you think of this stealth build right here. Is there something you would do different? And also do let us know what you think of this PC compared to the one we did in the previous episode. Do you like the stealth look more, or do you like the LEDs more? Or do you want to see something more over the top if we get another PC in and do the next episode? And I'll be looking for something maybe a little bit different. Maybe I'll look for a budget case and we'll change the case over. But with this series going forward, I actually don't want to change too much with the PC. I want to really just restore it instead of changing parts around and adding extra onto the budget. Unfortunately, in both episodes, I kind of had to add extra onto the budget in order to flip them and make them contemporary gaming PCs, especially with this one with faulty parts. But that's just how it is sometimes. I'll always show you guys the fails just as I'll show you all the victories, and I'm not afraid to do that because that's what life's all about. You have your ups and your downs, and even though this one ended up being a bit of a downer, I'm completely used to it by now. You guys know the drill, shit happens. And with that aside, if you enjoyed this one, be sure to hit that like button. And I look forward to seeing you guys in another tech video very soon. If you stayed this far as always and you're enjoying that Tech Yes content, be sure to smash that sub button, ring that bell, or just bookmark the Tech Yes City page on your browser and you'll get that content as soon as it drops. Anyway, I'll catch you next time, guys. Peace out for now. Bye.